I'm really looking forward to my upcoming Halloween party. I've got a couple of props that I've built already, including my Ash Williams costume and my DIY Gothic towers that I made out of pool noodles. But I've got one thing that I think's really going to add to the creepy factor. And listen, I don't know a place that's any more creepier than a cemetery. So stay with me as I show you how to make this become this. Hey, what's up? I'm Fids. So before I get into today's episode, I actually want to show you something that I recently bought. I went to a lucha event with a bunch of my friends. It was called Lucha Fantastica. It was really fun. It was over at Marrickville in Sydney, and they had a whole wrestling event with food and trucks and drinks and just a whole Day of the Dead spectacular. And to get in the full experience, I had to become part of the experience, brother. So I bought a mask. Now listen, I'm not gonna lie to you. You can't say shit from this thing. But I had such a fantastic time. I want you guys to let me know in the comments where you think I should put this thing. Now before I get into the build process, one thing that I will explain is that this right here is made from one piece of material. This is called XPS board. It's a polystyrene board. You can buy it from any hardware store. You can also buy them in different thicknesses and varieties from hobby stores. I started to do this book nook, this Batman themed book nook, and I had my first crack at using this for part of this diorama. I'm yet to finish it, but once it's done, I'll share with you guys what it looks like. But this right here is actually not that expensive. I want to say it was like 15, maybe 20 bucks. I bought it from Bunnings. There was different thicknesses. This one here is about an inch thick. And out of the one sheet, I made the top and bottom for 4 tombstones. I'll put the measurement for it up right here. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. It's literally one piece of material. Obviously there's paint, obviously there's glue. I'm gonna explain that through the build process. In fact, let's get into the build process. So to kick things off, I started off by measuring out the board and just designating my 4 zones that I was going to be using. The width was the real main thing that I was focusing on because I believe that I was cutting this with a decent thickness for the base to be compensated from it. Now, one thing that I will say is when you are cutting this stuff, you literally want to slowly make light cuts. And the reason for this is just so that way it doesn't get all jagged and rickety. Now, I actually went probably a little bit too hard on it, and you'll see in the sanding section exactly what it does. Now, once you cut it deep enough, you can actually snap it away. It's just a mad sound, but you don't really want to do that. If you can cut right down to the core, it's perfect. Now, you've got the top section there and the bottom section. They're literally just flat pieces, and I started off by just shaping out exactly what I wanted the tombstone to look like. I've got 2 that are square, and I've got one that's rounded. It's got this arch shape. And then the other one I've got is the peaked one that I showed you at the very beginning of the video. This doesn't really need to be exactly perfect because I'm going to shape it out perfectly a lot later when I get into the sanding, but just giving myself a guide in cutting it. Now, when I was cutting it, I used 2 different types of blades. I used this little handy finger blade. It's like a precision cutter. I got it years and years ago when I was doing some stenciling work, and it's by a company called Fids. Now, I started off by using this one because it's actually curved. I only used it for this one, to be perfectly honest with you, and in some tidying sections later on, but it's just to give me a guide. One thing about using a box cutter or a Stanley blade is that, especially with one like this is a thicker, heavier duty blade, and I don't want it to bend or snap or become, that does become dangerous. So I did use the Fisker blade to give me a guide, and then the Stanley blade just to really make those bigger, deeper cuts. For this bend, I will say that I focused on making sections that I could break off. One thing that I did factor in is when I was making these, I wanted to ensure that the text was going to be big enough to fit in it. I didn't want it to be too big. I didn't want it to be too small. And so I just started off by designating that area out. I like to make notes, just so if I ever get lost between, board to board, because I was making 4 at once, I could look at this sheet. The text width is 18.5 centimeters and 22 centimeters. Now this right here, I'm actually using my Cricut mobile app. I have a Cricut cutter that I use for the plotting and cutting of the paper that I'm using. This is just normal paper I'm attaching to the board. I initially wanted to use sticky vinyl. I saw a channel called Wicked Makers use it with vinyl, and I had signed vinyl, but it really just wasn't working and I wasn't happy with it. And I ran out of it. Didn't have enough time to order anymore. So I'm just using paper right here. Now I'm just loading this in my Cricut to cut the shape out, but I end up using a black marker to color out the area on the board. I'm going to run through that in a brief moment with you. But this right here, just with the Cricut, I use a Cricut plotter to cut shapes, and I've used it for stenciling and vinyl and stuff like that. It's a really cool tool. If you don't have it, you can freehand it. I will show you what that looks like in a brief moment because I also did some components of that. But once I put it through the plotter, I then took it and put it onto the board, and I'm going to show you that in a very, very short moment. But I'll then color in with the texture. And the problem is that the paper keeps lifting. And I tried to combat that as best as I could, but honestly, if I had more postage vinyl, like more signed vinyl, I would have used it to just have that perfect contact and then be able to color in the area. Now, once it was done cutting, I just took it off very gently because it is paper. It does stick to the mat a little bit, and you know, you have to be really careful because you don't want it to rip. But you'll see right here, I use the stencil that I've made to put over the top. Now, when I put it over the top, I'm then going to start to color in, which is what I was saying just a brief moment ago. Here I'm using the Fisker just to lift up some of the areas. I thought that I was going to be able to get that bottom area to look super nice. I couldn't. Part of the reason is because the font was way too small. If I could go back and change anything, I would probably change the size of the font at the bottom. But you can see here, this is what I was saying. I use the texture just to sharpie in on those spaces, and it gives you a visual guide. This right here is a depth router or a depth cutter attachment, and it just goes to a rotary tool. You can use it on like a Dremel. This is a Ryobi branded attachment, and I'm using it on a Azeto rotary tool. But basically what it does is you attach it to the top. It's got a drill bit, and then it can start to route into spaces, but it stops at a certain point, so you don't go all the way through. Now, the technique that I used was I would start in a corner and I would let it drop down to the maximum depth that it can sit on, and then I would use my hands and drag it through the areas and try and get rid of the painted areas or the sharpened areas. One thing that I will say is the font at the bottom is too small. It was too small for the router bit to get in nice and neatly, and so I ended up freehanding that bottom part, and you'll see what it looks like a little bit later on. Now, once it's all cut out from the inside, I've got this perfect template of the space that I want it to be leaded out. I can now attach it to the base. Now, you want to cut it against a flat end so that when you put the PVC glue or the tacky glue that I'm using, it's got perfect flat contact with that base. Now, once it's dry, we can actually start the sanding process. I've got a lot of rough areas, so that right there is a perfect example of why you want to go through it slowly. I used 3 different types of sandpapers. I had 80, 150, and 250 grit. I used the 80 to block off the big, fat, chunky areas that needed to be amended, and then I primarily used the 250. I'm not going to lie, it was really good to get a nice smooth texture to start off with. For any of the areas around the text, I did use 150, but I will say pay special attention around that text because it's going to bite you in the butt later on. Now, if you ever look at a tombstone, it's never perfectly flat. It's got a lot of rounded areas, and so I'm just sanding some of these areas out. I want some of them to look aged and some of them to not. Now, one little thing that I learned when I was making my diorama is that you can see at the bottom, it's perfectly smooth and it makes it look like it's a board. And so if you get a wire brush, you can tack into it and it makes these little tiny air bubble indentations like that. And it looks like an asphalt, like cement. However, A better technique that I'm using is this one. Spray water, just plain old water, and then you get a heat gun and you wrap it around that bad boy, and it adds all sorts of texture and bubbling and weathering to make it look like it's stone. Now you can see here, look, where the water is, it kind of stops it in areas and it really gives these nice undulations to it. I just used a mixture of some spare house paint that I had lying around. It's just because I wanted to get rid of the paint, and I had a grey and I had a white, and I could mix it together. When you're doing it, you don't have to use a heat gun like I am to let it dry. I mean, you could do it coat by coat. It didn't take much. I think it took 2 coats. And that's basically it, man. You're good to go. You do need to get a smaller brush into areas just to make sure the cracks and divots and spots like that are amended. Now, before I get into this section, one thing I will say that I didn't actually record for some stupid reason. There is these cracks. The way to do the cracks is actually with a pen. I would honestly use like some sort of crappy pen that's running out. And the reason for it is that if you have a look here, right, we've got the very tip of it. You've got this rounded surface around the edge of the pen. And what that does is it creates these folds into the cutting area. So you've got this indentation and then these channels, and it actually makes it look really jagged and nice. You don't want it to look perfect, and you don't want it to look planned. So just think, if you're making a shape like this, you got to cut across and just be really random, and less is more. Now, picking back up, what I did here is I mixed black acrylic paint. I mixed some water, like some just brush water. This is just dingy water that I use to stain things. If you watch my Ash Williams costume, you would have heard me talk about this. And I've also got some green. You can use a little bit of purple. And what you do is you mix it in, and you're basically using it like clumps of dirt. Now, you want to get it nice and deep into the text areas, especially when there's sections that pull, like the bottom of the Y, or the bottom flat areas of the carved out spaces, and especially at the top. And what you do is, because it's watered down, you can run it along and then spray it and let it dribble. I also use the heat gun to help dry it, and also to create these runs down the front of the board. Whenever you want to dry it off, if you've got too much water, you can always dry it off. Just make sure you rub down. Now, the reason why I said you want to rub down is because you can actually see here, see how it actually runs down, and it looks like it's gunky crap that's built up in the text and then pulled and then dribbled down the face of it. If you're rubbing across this way, it looks weird and it looks unnatural. So you really want it to look supernatural. It also has these clumped areas like this, these stains and this weathering piece. I'm really happy with how these came out. 2 things that I will say just to pay special attention to. When I cut these areas, this area is perfectly flat. That's actually the bottom of the board. And the reason why I did that is because it's already factory cut really straight. I'm not going to be able to cut it any straighter. I don't have a hot wire cutter or anything like that. So it's going to give me the best and most straightest line, so that when these parts sit together, they sit flat. If you ever do run into an issue and you're like, oh no, I've cut it and I need to attach it, if you get a sewing pin, you can actually just pin it in these corners. So you put it down like that into this bottom corner, and if you've glued it first at the bottom, you basically tack it in and think of it like a splint, and it will hold the area up really nicely. The other thing is the freehand text. I'd say it's probably not my favorite out of all of it, especially because when you look at how cool this looks, like it looks like it's properly made. This looks like someone's drawn in sand. And I'm happy with the overall look, but that's just one thing that I would change. The text was too small. So with the router bit, the thickness of the router bit, it would fold the letters in on itself, and it just didn't look nice. I tried to do it and then tried to fix it, and I couldn't, and so it ended up becoming the back of another board. The other thing that I'll say is we've got these like pock marks, these cracks, the staining. Overall, that to me is what makes it look really cool and really creepy. And yeah, I'm really happy with it overall. One thing that I will say about this overall Halloween party is I've run out of time to be able to do the chainsaw for my Ash Williams costume. I'm really bummed about it. I was hoping that I was going to be able to do it. but I've just run out of time. I don't have enough time to do that as well as make some of the other videos that I've got going on at the moment. And I really want to commit to giving you guys consistent and high quality videos. So I do apologize. I will be making it in the future. So make sure you stay tuned. And the best way to stay tuned is by liking and subscribing. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. I'm having a lot of fun with the videos that I'm making of recent. I've got a lot of gaming content. I've also got a lot of this craft content. And if that's your vibe, make sure you subscribe. Now, I've got a few more Halloween videos in store. So if you want to see any of the other Halloween stuff that I've made, go ahead and check out the playlist. I'll leave it in the description below. And listen, guys, listen. Until I see you next time, make sure you're looking after yourself, you take care, and be safe. All right, peace.